I now request a very distinguished companion, Bharat Venkatipur, to introduce our most distinguished, the Grand Summus.
Right, distinguished companions, very distinguished companions, eminent companions, and companions all. It's my very great pleasure and privilege to introduce to you our most distinguished companion, Ian Stanley Currans, is the third person to occupy this distinguished office as the head of our order. He follows after most distinguished companion Michael William Guest, and then thereafter most distinguished companion Andrew Christopher Sweeney. Most distinguished companion Currans was installed as most distinguished Grand Summus in 2018, and he has set a blistering pace ever since. The only word that I can use to describe the pace of his work and his commitment is blistering. And he has shown remarkable numbers in terms of achievements. As you heard just a little while ago, our Grand Recorder mentioned that this particular order has been growing at a fantastic rate, not only in England and Wales, but also in its districts and consistories overseas. It has far outbeaten every other order, especially among the orders administered by Mark Mason's Hall. And it is entirely due to his commitment and his tireless effort on behalf of this order, which commitment was telegraphed very early in his Masonic career. He has had a very distinguished career in whichever order he has been a member of. Not only is he a member of all the 10 orders administered by Mark Mason's Hall, but he's also achieved very high ranks in the craft chapter also. And wherever he has been, he has left behind an indelible mark of his commitment, and more important, of his dedication, not just to the order, but to the members of those under his care. Not there's a single incident where you'll ever find that he has never been warm and hospitable to anybody. Anybody who comes in touch with him goes back with the feeling that he has had a personal chat with such a distinguished brother. I've personally known him for some time now, and each time I meet him, it is a redoubled pleasure. I welcome him on behalf of all of you, and I have also heard him give various lectures in the past. He's a riveting speaker, and I'm sure you will all enjoy this presentation and an introduction to our beloved Order of the Scarlet Cord. Without any further ado, may I now request most distinguished companion, Ian Stanley Currans, to take over.
Thank you, Bharat. Good evening, brethren. My name is Ian Currans, as you've heard, and my talk this evening is about the ancient and Masonic order of the Scarlet Cord, one of the additional or progressive orders administered from Mark Mason's Hall in London, and the order of which I am privileged to be Grand Master, or in our terminology, Grand Summus. Scarlet Cord is widely regarded as being a new order. Indeed, the Grand Recorder Ryan Williams described it as such in his talk about progressive orders some weeks ago, and that, of course, is true. It was inaugurated in 2010, but in actual fact, the 2010 inauguration was the rebirth of an order that had originally come into existence towards the end of the 19th century. So let's first look back to that time, the end of the 19th century. The Order of the Secret Monitor was formally established in this country, that's in England, in 1887. It appears that one of the leading lights of that order, Judge Frederick Philbrick, we can see him on the screen there, Judge Frederick Philbrick, the first Grand Chancellor, decided very early on that it needed an appendant order, as several of the other Masonic bodies had. an order that would strengthen and augment the Order of the Secret Monitor and assist in raising capital for its benevolent aspirations. Hence was born in 1889 the Royal Order of Knights of the Scarlet Cord. It was governed by a senatus, presided over by the Summus. There were 6 grades, the ritual for which Philbrick composed from several sources, including an amplification of elements from the new OSM second degree. The most significant aspect of promotion through the grades was to have made increasingly large contributions to the OSM's benevolent fund. In the higher grades, eye-wateringly large contributions. Perhaps not surprisingly, membership of the order was never great. The first 3 grades were worked in a consistory. There was only ever one, Metropolitan Consistory in London. But grades 1 and 2 could be worked in sub-consistories, of which there were 5. Northern, which worked in Yorkshire in England, and others in South Africa, Central India, Madras, and Burma. But the order didn't need to be large. In 1915, for instance, the Summus was the Earl of Warwick, the past Summus, the Earl of Halsbury, the Regent Vicarius, the Earl of Lonsborough, and the King of Arms, Field Marshal Lord Methuen. That gives you an indication of the status and qualities of the people involved in Scarlet Cord in those days. Metropolitan Consistory worked regularly until 1914, the beginning of the First World War, of course, when it went into abeyance and was revived after that war in 1919. All workings of the order ceased in 1929, so a 40-year lifespan. Nobody knows why. Perhaps it was just too expensive after the years of the First World War and the Great Depression. Maybe its pomp and splendor, wearing court dress and other relics of the Victorian era were just outdated. Maybe because the founding fathers back in 1889 were all dead. Maybe because its aim of raising a huge capital sum for the OSM Benevolent Fund had been achieved. Maybe because the OSM's new Grand Supreme Ruler, Charles Napier Clavering, was not a fan. Possibly a combination of all these. Suffice to say, that was it for over 70 years. On the 8th of June 2001, Peter Glyn Williams, you'll see Peter sitting there, Peter Glyn Williams, Grand Supreme Ruler of the Order of the Secret Monitor, delivered a paper to the Supreme Rulers Conclave number 123 at Mark Mason's Hall about the old order. Peter said this was, and I quote, in response to the interest shown by brethren in their questions when visiting conclaves in the provinces. The paper was widely distributed, both here in England and overseas, and doubtless generated even more interest. But still, the order remained in abeyance. In 2005, the concept of match funding charitable donations by provinces and districts from the OSM Benevolent Fund was raised at the Executive Committee. The Grand Treasurer at the time, George Cawood, was in favour, but pointed out that if the demand was high, the interest on the capital would be insufficient to cover the donations. The fund needed a significant top-up. It was then that the Deputy Grand Supreme Ruler at the time, Brian Wareham, suggested to Peter Glyn Williams the idea of resuscitating the old Scarlet cord, with its system of payments to the Benevolent Fund being a requirement for entry and promotion through the grades. Donations much smaller, it must be said, than the huge ones set in the Victorian era. Peter and Brian floated the suggestion past a few senior OSM members on a trip to South Africa in February 2006. We were all in favour, and they then spent a considerable amount of time in searching the archives at Mark Mason's Hall and Great Queen Street for documents and rituals. On the 17th of November 2006, Peter, as Grand Supreme Ruler and therefore guardian of the old rite, created a small group as members of the order and then worked a revised first grade. It was also decided to consecrate a special secret monitor conclave to introduce princes, in other words, those that had taken their second degree in the Order of the Secret Monitor, into this appendant order, and eventually process them through the various grades. Scarlet, called Conclave number 500, came into being on the 5th of December 2006. During 2007, that conclave travelled all over England and to Scotland to admit candidates into the order. Such was the overwhelming demand that further Scarlet called conclaves were consecrated both in England and overseas from January 2008 onwards. These local units gradually took on the burden of admitting candidates, leaving number 500 free to promulgate the subsequent grades as they were being revised or written. In April 2009, a steering committee was constituted to report on what the future might hold for this booming order. The Grand Recorder of the time, John Brackley, soon suggested the radical idea of constituting it as a sovereign order in its own right, free from the OSM. The idea was embraced enthusiastically, and the steering committee, renamed the Way Forward Committee, set about a programme to produce this end result. There was, as can be imagined, a phenomenal amount to do. Apart from the revising and writing of the grades, which was ongoing, an inauguration ritual had to be produced, constitutions written, a structure at Grand Senatus and provincial and district level established, regalia to be designed, appointments to be made. The list is almost endless. Nevertheless, it was all achieved by a relatively small number of people in a relatively short space of time. The inauguration of the order was set for the 21st of July 2010 at Great Queen Street. In the morning in Temple 10, Scarlet, called Conclave number 500, met for the last time and admitted multiple candidates who all wanted to witness the inauguration of an order. Subsequently, OSM Grand Conclave was opened in the Grand Temple at Great Queen Street, and the 64 Scarlet called conclaves were formally removed from the roll. A Scarlet called consistory was then opened, and Grand Senatus was then constituted, dedicated, and consecrated to comprise 64 consistories by Brian Wareham. Michael Guest, Grand Supreme Ruler of the OSM, was installed as Grand Summus by Michael Herbert, and he then invested the Grand Officers, including provincial and district Grand Summi, dealt with administrative business, and closed Grand Senatus. An excellent dinner at the Connaught Rooms next door followed. All in all, a staggeringly impressive day, orchestrated quite superbly by Roy Levers. The order has progressed constantly since that day. Michael Guest was succeeded by Andrew Sweeney in 2012, and I took over in 2018. So, where are we now? Our memberships are in excess of 3,300, distributed around 22 provinces in England and Wales, 5 districts overseas, Southeast Asia, Southern Caribbean, Southern India, Western India, and Spain, as well as unattached consistories on the Isle of Man, in Switzerland, Hong Kong, 3 in Eastern India, and had it not been for the suspension of Masonic activity, Estonia. Additionally, Scarlet Cord ceremonies are worked in Australia, New Zealand, and Canada under their OSM Grand Conclaves, and in America under the Allied Masonic Degrees USA. We currently have 133 consistories, with several more just waiting to be consecrated once the COVID pandemic is over. Our membership growth last year was 8.5%, making us easily the fastest growing mainstream Masonic order. Now, the structure. The order's regulatory body is Grand Senatus, and the structure of that is identical to the majority of other orders. Similarly, a province or district overseas is ruled by a provincial or district Grand Summus with the usual complement of officers. The individual unit is called a consistory. At its head is the president, who, apart from the usual leadership duties, is responsible for performing 3rd grade ceremonies within the consistory. His senior warden equivalent, if you like, is the primus of lectores, whose duty it is to perform 2nd grade ceremonies. And the junior warden equivalent is the primus of ostiarii, who performs 1st grade ceremonies. It's noteworthy that companions will potentially reach the chair with 2 ceremonies already under their belt. Each consistory has 4 lecturers who deliver rather challenging pieces of ritual in the 1st and 2nd grades to relate the appropriate Old Testament stories. Many consistories meet either before or, unusually, after an OSM meeting and then dine together. This has the advantage of keeping costs to a minimum. Some of the officers' titles are Latin names and are retained from the original order. Primus of lectores, Primus of ostiarii, and Episcopus for the chaplain. And at grand level, Summus, of course, and Grand Regent Vicarius, a distinction bestowed on a very small number of companions above the level of a provincial or district head. The individual member is a companion, marking a distinction to the mother order, the OSM, where brother is used, and reflecting the brother-companion relationship in the Craft and Royal Arch. The charity contribution for promotion through the grades is no longer required. So, what are the ceremonies of the Scarlet Cord? The 1st grade, for which, as previously explained, the candidate until the pandemic started must have taken their 2nd degree in the Order of the Secret Monitor, although that qualification has temporarily been removed at the moment. The first grade relates the biblical story of Rahab, who hid Joshua's spies before the capture of the city of Jericho. To protect herself and her family during that battle, Rahab tied a scarlet cord in her window. Rahab is widely believed to have run what might be called house of entertainment, and the scarlet cord in her window is reckoned by some to be the origin of the term red light district. Possession of this grade brings with it the title ostiarios, meaning gatekeeper. Rahab went to live among the Israelites and married the son of one of the spies. They had a son, Boaz. Yes, the very same Boaz who is mentioned so fleetingly in the craft. The second grade of the order is about Boaz and his marriage to Ruth, events which are related in the 8th book of the Bible. They have a son called Obed, who had a son called Jesse, who was the father of King David. So thanks to Scarlet Cord, you can now see that Boaz was indeed the great-grandfather of David. Candidates for this grade receive the title lector, meaning reader. And there is Boaz, and there is Ruth. The third grade is unique amongst Scarlet Cord ceremonies in that it is not based upon an Old Testament story. Much of it is lifted straight from the original order's third grade and is much concerned with honour and the hope of resurrection in the life to come. Candidates become fellows. As I alluded to previously, the first 3 grades of the order are conferred in an individual consistory. There is, of course, an installation ceremony, which brings with it the title distinguished. But before a suitably elected companion can be installed, he must go through the preparation ceremony, which is based on the early life of the prophet Samuel, and is usually conducted at provincial or district level. A prepared companion bears the title eminent. 3 years after installation, and upon recommendation by the province or district, a past president can be nominated for the 4th grade. This ceremony is conducted usually by the Grand Summus and the Grand Officers of the year, with significant contributions by the 4 Grand Lecturers, as we return again to the events leading up to the capture of Jericho and elements of the battle itself. This is always a wonderfully spectacular occasion, with lots of colour, music, and singing. Very much a Ben-Hur production, if you like, bringing it with the appellation counsellor. This is in complete contrast to the 5th grade ceremony, which is on a much smaller scale, reflecting its exclusivity. The grade is only conferred on Grand Officers of 3 years standing, on recommendation of the local rulers, and is limited to 2 recipients per province or district per year. Here, we learn of the story of the prophet Jeremiah, a name mentioned almost as an aside in the Royal Arch Exaltation ceremony, and Jeremiah's role in preserving the temple treasures before the attack of the Babylonians. Keeper of the Hidden Secret is the enigmatic title bestowed here. The 6th grade is only conducted when necessity dictates and is conferred very sparingly and entirely at the discretion of the Grand Summus. Various episodes in the Wars of the Maccabees form the basis of this, the most dramatic of all the grades. The Maccabees were essentially Jewish freedom fighters, some 150 years before the birth of Christ, and their triumph left the Jews in peace and in command of their own destiny until the Roman invasion around 100 years later. Those in possession of this grade are designated Prince of Jerusalem. So, what of the regalia? A companion of the order wears a scarlet cord, either around the waist or over the shoulder, depending on his grade. Additionally, he wears a jewel suspended around his neck for the first and second grades, or a breast jewel for the third grade. Officers of the consistory wear a sash, and the president, primus of lectores, and primus of ostiarii wear collarets, which reflect their responsibilities for conferring the first, second, and third grades. Provincial and district officers wear strident yellow sashes, while those of grand officers are, of course, scarlet. And there's my one there. Holders of the fourth grade have breast jewels, while those with the fifth and sixth grades wear those splendid but slightly ostentatious stars, silver for the fifth grade and gold for the sixth grade. They are known colloquially as sheriff's badges or marshal's badges. The members of the Grand Summus's personal bodyguard, the Sadiqim, wear purple sashes, like this one, and they have special swords, like that one. Well, the Grand Summus himself, of course, has plenty of bling, including this collarette, baton, chain, and this splendid purple robe, which is usually hanging like Batman's cape in the Batcave, just waiting for a call to action. And finally, what is special about the Scarlet Cord, and why should those of you simply in the Secret Monitor, why should you consider joining? So, reason number one, the rituals filling gaps in the craft and Royal Arch, even though chapter is not a requirement for joining. You would certainly understand much more clearly the position of the craft second and third degrees and the Royal Arch exaltation and installations in the historical timeline if you were a Scarlet Cord companion. Second reason, if you like ritual party pieces, this order is for you. Likewise, if you struggle with ritual, then splitting it up is positively encouraged. Reason number three, the ritual has all been written or rewritten in the 21st century. So it's clear and concise with a total absence of mumbo jumbo. There is much drama, colour, music plays an integral part. Flickering candles, flashing sword blades, stories told in flashback, and other elements from the TV age. The Scarlet Cord has it all. Fourth, It's predominantly based on Old Testament history, and its lessons are those of morality, not heavy spirituality. 5. Opportunities for progression are open through provincial or district ranks and grand ranks, as well as through the grades of the order. So the next step in progression is never too far away. And 6. Finally, the provincial and district rulers are all friendly, approachable, and very enthusiastic, as are those at grand level. We love to communicate and engage with individual members, whoever they are. Even the Grand Summus is happy to take questions, as he is now. Thank you for listening.
Companions, the question and answer session is now open. May I request the co-host to mute all participants. Brethren, please use only the chat window to raise your questions. I now also request a very distinguished companion, Bharatipur, to moderate the Q&A session.
Thank you, most distinguished companion, Ian Stanley Currans, for that wonderful introduction to our order, and in your usual inimitable style. And it never surprises me how much passion you bring into whatever you do. It's always a pleasure to listen to you.
Thank you. And thank you for your introduction, by the way, with all those compliments. I must get you to speak
every bit of it was true.
I must get you to speak to my ex-wife and see what she thinks about all the nice things you said about me.
Always willing to lend a hand for that. Okay, companions and brethren of the Sacred Monitor, those of you who have any questions, please type it up on the chat box, and I shall try to make sure that each and every one of your questions is put to most distinguished Grand Summus, and I'm sure you'll be happy to answer all your questions. The first question now comes from a person who's truly concerned about finances.
Oh, okay.
Okay. His name is BSC Rao. He's from Bangalore. His question, of course, starts off by complimenting you on the presentation, but he wonders how much does it cost in terms of initiation and annual dues. So I think maybe this could be answered by the district grand recorder instead of you. Grand Summus.
But we should point out that if he's going to join now, it's going to be half price because of the new measures to stimulate growth which have just been introduced. So whatever it was last month, it's going to be half of that this month and going forward.
Thank you. So that's an additional incentive. Reason number 7. Well, you already heard 6 reasons. Now you got reason number 7 coming up.
Yeah, but I'm sure Uma will be able to answer more accurately about India than I will.
Yeah. Uma, would you like to add to that? Yeah.
It's not very expensive, brother BSC Rao. I will email you all the details.
Brother, I'm still waiting for your questions. You're all of you are complimenting the presenter as well as the presentation.
There's one question from Sanjay Ranganathan.
Okay.
It says the order being the extension of OSM, and so why is OSM a conclave and Scarlet Cord a consistory?
Okay.
Well, probably 2 reasons. The original order, which, as I said, was originally started in 1889, when we recreated the order, we used a lot of the original terminology because we thought that the terminology was good. You know, it was interesting. It sounded impressive. So we used the titles, as I said, we used the titles Summus and Grand Regent Vicarius and Episcopus. We use those titles. They sounded, to be honest, they sounded so cool. I mean, I always wanted to be a Grand Regent Vicarius because I just thought that's such a cool title. And I never was and now I never will be, but I just thought it was great. So the original, as I said, the original, there was one consistory. It was called a consistory. I don't know why they chose back in 1889 the title for a unit consistory, but they did. So when we were reconstituting the order and doing all the things we had to do, we kept a lot of that stuff, and the term consistory we decided was perfect for a unit. And I suppose it's just to make things a bit different, isn't it? I mean, I don't know how many different kinds of Masonic units you're a member of, but many of them have different titles, don't they? So, you know, you might be in a craft lodge or a mark lodge, but then you're in a Royal Arch chapter or an OSM conclave, or you know, those of you that are in KT in India will be in a preceptory, and you know, and a rose choir, you're in a chapter. So it's just something we do in Masonry, just to add a bit of variation, isn't it? I think that's the real joy of one of the real joys of the progressive orders, is the variation you get. You know, obviously we've all got the craft at heart, but I mean, I couldn't go to 4 craft meetings a week. It'd drive me absolutely bonkers. I enjoy that variation and those differences. So it's really for 2 reasons. It's historical, and it's just to add some variation.
Thank you, most distinguished Summus. May I add one more reason? It's to trip up directors of ceremonies when they do proclamations.
Well, absolutely, yeah. It sorts the men from the boys, doesn't it?
Yeah, yes, it does. Okay, we have another question. This is from distinguished companion V.L. Narayanan. Is there any limit on the number of candidates that may be taken at a time for each grade?
No, there isn't. There's no limit at all. No limit at all. I mean, I'm sure you've done this in India. I know when you were creating the consistories originally. I mean, we know this from the Facebook posts that we've been having on the creation of the orders. Teams were going. I know, Barrett, you were involved in lots of these teams going around and to different states in India, different cities and towns in India, to create the order. And you were bringing in lots of local OSM princes in one year. You know, maybe a dozen or so at a time. I mean, it's not ideal. But certainly when we were developing the order in the early days, it was really the only way of promulgating the grades. It's not ideal. Personally, I like to be able to give all the candidates, the same experience. So I always think it's a bit disappointing when you have one representative candidate and everybody else just sits on the sidelines. So what we try and do in those grades, if we can, is to keep it to a number where you can move people around comfortably, but everybody gets moved around, everybody takes an obligation, everybody is entrusted with the regalia and signs and secrets as much as possible. So it's nice to keep the numbers small, but there are occasions when we can't do that. I mean, we were going to do, as you know, we were going to do the 4th grade at Mark Mason's Hall the day before Grand Sonatus in May. I'd approved 72 candidates for the 4th grade. So, you know, that was going to be a big participation event. But the 4th grade works a bit easier with large numbers, which the 5th grade doesn't. But so, you know, in answer to the question, there isn't a limit, but we do try and, I suppose, keep the numbers down a little bit just to make it the same experience for each candidate and make it a bit more personal.
Thank you. Then the same companion has asked a second question. He says, is there any fixed duration between the grades?
Yeah, 4 weeks, except by dispensation.
Okay.
So generally speaking, the constitutions and regulations say the gap between the grades is 4 weeks, but by dispensation, which is, I wouldn't say simply and easily granted, but I mean, if there's a valid reason, otherwise, then it can be done. It can be done. And as I said, back in the day, Barrett, you will remember conferring the first 3 grades on a number of companions on the same day. But nowadays we're established. It's a gap of 4 weeks. But that's not to say if we were starting, for the sake of argument, if we start Scarlet called maybe in Sri Lanka has been talked about, Mauritius has been talked about. If we go there, we will need to do the first 3 grades on the same day or within a very, very short space of time. So it can be done, but the rules say it's 28 days.
All right, thank you. There's another question from companion Joseph George. He says, are there any consistories in South Africa? And
No, there aren't. No, there aren't. Although I've been talking to, there's a guy in Cape Town called Leslie Martin. He's the secretary of Goldstone Conclave, which meets in Cape Town, and he took Scarlet Cord very early on. I think just the first and maybe the first grade or first and second grade. And he's kind of looking at, before the virus struck, he was kind of looking at the possibility of taking Scarlet Cord to South Africa, probably to Cape Town, at some stage in the future. The OSM is not, I think, not particularly strong now in South Africa. Certainly Goldstone itself is not a particularly strong OSM conclave. So I think his thought process was that he needs to build up Goldstone OSM and then form a consistory there. But it's like India was to start with. I mean, it's a vast country, and you've got centres of OSM dotted all over the place. So it's wherever we pick. It might be handy for 20 people, but it's going to be a long way for people in the rest of the country. So it is a bit of a problem, but it's certainly something I'd love to do, and you know, I'd be happy to start the Scarlet Cord anywhere. You know, we're not so sure about North Korea, but more or less anywhere else. Yeah.
But that too might come around sooner than you think. but on a just offer, I'm sure there are a number of companions of the order from India who would be happy to assist you in this part of the world, wherever.
Yeah, absolutely.
If required.
Yeah, I know. I mean, Stephen. I've talked to Stephen Hines about Mauritius, and David Rose, who I'm sure everybody will know, is very keen to get the order into Sri Lanka. Yeah, we've got lots of you know, there's several options. As you all know, we had this just before well, in November, 16th of November of last year, we had this mammoth project to get 3 consistories going in Kolkata, didn't we? Which was very successful. So you know, so it can be done with enough people with drive and enthusiasm, people that are willing to travel. These things can be done, and that's absolutely great. I mean, I know, you know, hopefully we'll be, you know, we've got nothing up at, we've got nothing in Delhi, New Delhi area, have we? Or
not yet.
Up there, not yet. So
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
That's other areas we've got to be, once we get going again, we've got to be looking at. Hopefully.
Great, that's great to hear. Next question is from companion Sujit Soman. He asks, is there any particular reason why the 5th grade is limited to just 2? I don't see that being limited to 2. I think he's got it wrong anyway.
No, it's limited to 2 companions per province or district per year. Okay. So a district can put forward 2 people every year, or a province in England and Wales can put forward 2 people every year. It just forms this kind of a pyramid. So the further you go, to a certain extent, the harder you have to work to get preferment, you know, and it makes it special. So people, you know, I mean, people love wearing those sheriff's badges, don't they? I mean,
yes, of course.
because you can wear them with your OSM regalia. You know, people love wearing those things. So you know, it is the hope of reward that sweetens labour, isn't it? So we want people to work really hard for Scarlet Cord, and then when you get the 4th grade or the 5th grade or even the 6th grade, I mean, it's really something special, and it's something to be proud of, you know. If we were to hand them out willy-nilly, just getting one would be meaningless, because, you know, everybody gets one. So the idea is to stimulate people to work really hard for the order, firstly, and to secondly, to make it something really special to aspire to. So that's the reason. That's the reason. As the further you progress in the grades, the more selective we are about who gets them and who doesn't. But that's not to say anybody, anybody can get to the 5th grade. Anybody can get to the 5th grade just by hard work and application.
Great, thank you. There's a question from Abraham Mampul. He says, can all the degrees in the order be received in India itself, or do I have to travel to the United Kingdom for the final grades?
Well,
I've seen you done 4th and 5th here, so I guess the 6th.
Yeah, I mean,
probably,
up until probably I can't remember. I think certainly not in my time, but the 4th grade has been done certainly in. I think Chilapa's done a couple of 4th grades in the past. I don't think you've done a 4th grade in India since my time as Grand Summus, although some people have come to London to do the 4th grade with us. Certainly in 2018, just after I was installed, I came to India. I know you were there, Barrett. I came to India. I came to India and we did the 5th grade for something like 16 or 17 people, because at that time there was only 5 of you in India that had a 5th grade. So we came to India to do the 5th grade there, and we certainly will come back to do the 5th grade. As I said earlier, I know that there's a number of people. I don't know whether you've got any plans to do the 4th grade. It may be that I can come back and do a 4th grade and a 5th grade. As soon as we start working again, and. But I mean, that's great. But, there is a possibility of coming to London to do it. Although, of course, I realise, for a lot of people, that's a very expensive exercise. Does that answer the question?
I'm sure. Yeah, that's certainly. Thank you. The next question is from Brother S.S. Prasad. He says, are the rituals to be recited or read? I think that's obvious to be recited.
Yeah. Absolutely recited. Absolutely recited. Yeah, I am very much. Oh, okay. So sometimes somebody won't turn up to a meeting at the last, unexpectedly, and the ritual may have to be read by a stand-in. But other than that, I have to say the ritual has to be learnt. I can see no point in just standing up and reading a piece of ritual, because there's no satisfaction in doing that. I mean, anybody could do that, anybody could do that. You could ask the waitress to come in and read the ritual. It wouldn't be, she'd be probably prettier to look at. There's no advantage in reading ritual. So what we say is you learn the ritual. If you can't learn the ritual, or you can only learn a small portion of ritual, then we can divide the ritual up. So do what you can. It's a simple thing. If you can only do 2 paragraphs or 1 paragraph, do that well, and let somebody else do the other bit well, or 2 or 3 people do the other bit well. But please, yes, recite it. Don't read it, because it really shows you put no effort in. Really, it's a simple answer, in my view.
I think we share that view.
Yes.
Now the next question is from Brother Govind Welling. He says, when he joined the Scarlet Chord, a very beautiful floor cloth was used that resembled an open grave. Are floor cloths still used?
Yeah, in the 3rd grade, yes. Yes.
Okay. And then the next question is from Brother Brayabhushan Sethi. He says, the order ceased in 1929. And his question is, was it only on account of finances or any other reason? I think you already mentioned that in your presentation.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment. At the moment, we don't know. We really don't know. It's one thing. I know I've been talking about this. There is so much about the old order that we don't know anything about. So one of my projects is particularly. I mean, this came to light when I was writing this talk, which I did originally for the Facebook group Freemasons Without Borders a couple of months ago now. I really began to realise how little about the old order we actually know. So one of my projects is to really find out as much as we can about the old order and why it ceased. As I say, it could have been for many reasons, of financial reasons. It was interesting that several of the people who were involved at the outset, the last of them died just before the order ceased working. So it may have been, you know, for sentimental reasons, they kept it going while the last of the old guard were dead, until they were dead. And then once they died off, they decided, right, that's it. Napier Clavering came into office at the same time the order ceased working. Perhaps he didn't like it and said, look, we're going to kill it now. We just don't know. We simply don't know.
Okay, then I have now 3 questions from companion Rinesh Hegde. The first question is, why are the members of the order called companions? I think you dealt with that, but maybe he wants a little more explanation. That's the first question. The second question, Sorry,
same question,
yeah.
Same answer really is, why is it a conclave and a consistory? It's just to differentiate between the two orders, and just to make things a little bit different, I suppose.
Right.
And I think, companion has that. Companion gives the impression of, I think, being a bit closer. You know, you're companions together, aren't you? Companions traveling together. It kind of gives that impression of closeness, I think. Fellow traveler, if you like.
And the next question from Rinesh is, can we wear the jewel of the Scarlet Cord at an OSM meeting in the same way as we wear the chapter's jewel in a craft meeting, or an RAM jewel in a mark?
I mean, certainly, right at the outset, Michael Guest, of course, who was Grand Supreme Ruler of the OSM in England at the time, and head of the Scarlet Cord, said that the appropriate Scarlet Cord jewel can be worn in OSM conclaves. I'm not sure that Dr. Biswakuma has ever changed that, or Chilapa. I very much doubt whether they've ever changed that. So yes, as far as I'm concerned, certainly in England, in the OSM under Andrew Sweeney, yes, you can wear the appropriate Scarlet Cord. The highest ranking jewel you have for Scarlet Cord can be worn with OSM regalia. Yes, certainly. I don't know whether you do that in the OSM in India, do you?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
In fact, we also sometimes wear the Scarlet Cord tie for an OSM meeting too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And the last question from Rinesh is there any specified number of knots that one needs to have in the Scarlet Cord?
Knots?
When it is knotted together, is there any number of knots?
Yeah, 1 for the first grade, 2 for the second. I'm only joking. No, there isn't. No, there's absolutely not.
Oh God! Imagine if you had this. Okay, for the 6th grade, you have that.
Yeah, you would be right around here, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yes.
All right. Okay.
And you can do whatever knot you like. You know, you can be a reef knot or any of those other knots that you learn in the Boy Scouts. It doesn't matter what knot you use.
Right. As long as it's not a hangman's noose. Okay. We have a question again from V.L. Narayanan. He says, why is there a separate preparation ceremony and not part of the installation itself? Why have they separated the two?
It was just, I mean, that wasn't original. That was an idea that Brian Wareham came up with, that it would be very special to prepare you. I think he was, and I'm doing this from memory, I think he was inspired by some kind of ceremony that's in London, in the livery companies or something, where they do some kind of a preparation for the person who becomes master of the livery company, and they're given some document before they become master of the company. I think it was something like that, and Brian just thought that was a really cool idea that we could introduce into Scarlet Cord, this preparation thing, which would actually prepare you for the office of president. So I think that was the stimulation, and it's quite important, because many of you will have seen a preparation ceremony. It's not confined to candidates. Anybody who's done the first 3 grades can watch people going through their preparation ceremony. And of course, it does test you, to the candidate, it does test you on the principles of the first 3 grades. So it's kind of a way of proving your proficiency, that you've understood the first 3 grades before you proceed on to take the chair of a consistory. So the concept is good. It's a good concept. It tests the candidates, and it proves they're ready for the president's chair in a way.
Thank you. Next question is from companion Sukumaran. He says, what is the overall message that the order tries to convey? For example, in the OSM, it's all about friendship, and a true friendship between brethren. So what is the core message of this order?
Basically, certainly the first 3 grades is faith, hope, and charity. The first grade, as I explained, being about Rahab. Rahab was not an Israelite. Rahab was a Canaanite, but she understood that the God of the Israelites would prevail. So she took on board the promise of the spies, that if she helped them take the city, that she and her family would be protected. So she showed a lot of faith. She showed a lot of faith in the God of the Israelites and in the Israelites themselves, that they would protect her if she assisted them. So the message of the first grade is faith. The message of the second grade is charity. As we've heard, the second grade is about the biblical heroine Ruth. She was incredibly kind to her mother-in-law, and Boaz was incredibly kind to her. So the message of the second grade is all about charity, not giving money, but charity in its wider sense. And the third grade, as I explained, the third grade is not a Bible story. The third grade never was a Bible story, but it was kept because it's important. The message is important. It's significant, and visually, the third grade is very attractive. You know, there's without giving too much away, there's darkness and flickering candles and flashing swords and things. Visually, people like the third grade because it's impressive to take part in. It's impressive to be a candidate. It's impressive to watch. So we kept the third grade virtually unchanged from the original, and that's all about hope in an afterlife, hope in salvation. So it fitted in. The 3 grades really fitted in nicely. You've got these 3 concepts, important concepts of faith, hope, and charity. And the final grades are, the message there really is about faith, having a faith in the God of our fathers, basically. That's the, and the power of, the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant plays a significant part in the 4th, 5th, and 6th grades. And, that's a symbol of God's power here, or was the symbol of God's power here on earth, the Ark of the Covenant. And as I say, actually, the Ark, or a replica of the Ark that we have, plays a significant part in the 4th, 5th, and 6th grades. So that's the message, the concept.
Great. And now we have another question from Dr. Samarnath. He says, why are there no prayers that have to be rendered by the episcopus in the 2nd and 3rd grade opening and closing ceremonies? Like it is there in the 1st grade, but not in the 2nd and 3rd.
Yeah. Good question. I think we have we have a prayer. Obviously, we have a prayer in the opening. We have a prayer.
We have the prayers in the ceremony itself, but not in the open.
A prayer.
Yeah.
But in the ceremony itself, I suppose we didn't. As I said, we tried to keep the ceremonies as simple as possible and as punchy as possible. And I mean, to a certain extent, Scarlet Cord is more about morality than about spirituality, I think. So basically, the ceremonies, probably they spend a fair bit of time telling a story from which you can draw all sorts of moral lessons, and probably less time. You know, we don't have lots of prayers. We don't have long obligations. You know, like 2-page obligations like you get in the secret monitor, which nobody can ever learn. You know, we don't have things like that. We have, you know, a minimum of prayers. Not, I don't think that makes it disrespectful to God. We just have a minimum number of prayers. We have a short obligations. Most of it is telling a story with important moral and religious connotations. Interesting question.
Thank you. But, yeah, but just my personal note, one of the things which I find fascinating about these rituals is the element of music. That adds a completely extra dimension to the whole thing, especially, that makes it absolutely memorable. Anybody who's gone through that, anybody who's gone through that will never forget it.
I think so.
Yeah. Most distinguished Grand Summus, we have come to the end of the questions as far as the chat room is concerned. And I will probably take it upon myself to thank you for so patiently answering all the questions put to you by the members of the order as well as the sacred monitors. I do hope that this will translate into some more rapid growth here.
Yes, that will be absolutely wonderful. That's obviously the aim. I would urge those people who are not in Scarlet Cord or in Secret Monitor, please give it some serious consideration. I know I'm biased, but I mean you will love the companionship. You will love the ceremonies, and the ceremonies. I think everybody who's been through several of our ceremonies will understand that the ceremonies do get better and better and better as you progress through them. You know. Until once you've been through the chair and you do 4th and 5th grade ceremonies, they are truly spectacular. So it's something, you know. So I urge all those of you who are nodding to give it some serious consideration.
Thank you, most distinguished Grand Summus. Right, distinguished Summus, District Grand Summus, would you like to say a few words before we close the meeting? Right, distinguished Summus.
Maybe he's nodded off.
Okay.
Maybe.
No. I think he's muted.
Yeah. May I request, right, distinguished District Grand Summus, distinguished companion, please take it.
Most distinguished Grand Summus and all companions and brethren of Order of Secret Monitor, I'm sure all of you would have been enlightened more about our own order. We have been going to the temple, attending the consistory meeting and doing the ceremonies. But the background of it, the historical aspect of the order has been more enlightened today by our most distinguished Grand Summus. And I profusely thank on behalf of all the companions of the district for sparing your valuable time. And that shows your love and affection for our district, especially, I'm sure. So, particularly to district of Southern India, and your attachment to the Order of Scarlet Cord in general. Thank you. Thank you very much, your most distinguished Grand Summus.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
For giving us the opportunity to host this presentation, as well as by we also gained a lot of knowledge, and this will in turn percolate to the other companions and brethren of Order of Secret Monitor, so that they'll be induced to join this order, and the future of this Order of Secret Scarlet Cord may be bright in this district. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night, all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, most distinguished.
Thanks.
Thank you, brethren. Good night.